Greetings, everyone. Pete Pardo here from Sea of Tranquility. Welcome to another edition of the show alongside Martin Popoff in the co-captain's chair. Good morning, my friend. How are things up in the Great White North today?
Not too bad, not too bad. Windy, rainy, then not rainy, then sunny. It's all over the place.
But no sun here. Lots of rain this morning, and I think it's all day today. So there's your weather forecast for the day, right?
All right, yeah.
So today we've got, this is a show that we've been talking about doing for a while, and we finally said, screw it, we're just going to do it. These are bands that everybody seems to love, fellow listeners, critics, everybody digs them. For whatever reason, we just don't get them. And Martin and I were just joking before we went on air here. It's like, with a band that's not resonating with you, how much do you continue to try and get into them before you realize, this just isn't happening. I mean, we can't like everything. And I sometimes, I'll be the first to admit there are some bands that I don't understand why everybody loves them, but people do. And I don't. There's a lot of groups that I really love that people don't get into. That's just the way the world bounces, right? So for folks watching this show, there's obviously going to be bands that we're going to talk about here that you absolutely love to death. That's totally fine. We get it. We just don't like them, and we'll give you some reasons why. So I'll have Martin kick us off with his first selection of the day here.
Yeah, you said a very important thing there. I feel like this is a good show to do because I often see too often with people like us who love music to death that it looks like over time that we love everything, right? We just love too much. Absolutely. Exactly. And I see that too often with too many people. And I get accused of it as well quite often when I go, that's my favorite, one of my favorite albums of all time, right? Or it easily makes my top 10, right? But if people went over the history of everything on YouTube and podcasts and all that, they'd probably find out that I've said 30 or 40 albums have made my top 10, right? So that's the problem, right? We like too much stuff, and it gets to be to the point where you can't like everything. You're not supposed to be liking everything. You got to draw the line somewhere and have some discipline on it. The same way when we used to review albums all the time. Oh, everything's an 8 or a 9 or a 10 out of 10, right? That you got to have some discipline again, hand out some 7s and 6s, right? Yeah. And get serious about it, right? So that's kind of the point here, or one of the points that there'll be different points along the way. But yes, my first selection of these 5 bands I just don't get. These guys right here, Bon Jovi. Some of these bands will fall into the category of critics' darlings, and some of them will fall into the category of they just sold a gazillion records, and some are a little bit of both. Bon Jovi, I think, is a little bit of both, although they fall more into the camp of selling a gazillion records, right? First one went platinum, next one went platinum, Slippery When Wet, 12 times platinum, New Jersey, 7 times platinum. They got a double, another platinum, sold a ton of records. My excitement for this band ended with Runaway off of this album. And after that, when you get into the Bruce Fairbairn productions eventually on the big albums and that, I almost feel like it gave you everything you didn't like about modern Aerosmith and none of the personality. That's the way I've always felt about Bon Jovi. They were like, and every sort of egregious thing you hated about hair metal, but none of the personality. And they were from out east, which was weird, right? So for whatever reason, and all along the way, I've done about 2,000 interviews in my life, right? Never interviewed a single member of Bon Jovi because I just never got on that train. Never liked an album enough to get on that train, which is different from Poison. I did get on the train eventually. Don't like their big albums. Love almost everything later. Love the guys, right? Started interviewing like crazy, right? Meeting with them, right? But this band, I just never got onto because I call those productions on those records car sick. It gives me that slightly nauseated feel where it doesn't feel like real snare. It doesn't feel like real bass drums. It doesn't feel like real hi-hats and cymbals, a lot like Joey Kramer drumming, right? During that era, right? Never liked the guitar sounds. They just kind of sat there in some sort of car sick mid-rangey tone. John Bon Jovi's voice, you hear the stories about him straining at times and then how it's really cleaned up in that. I don't know. I won't go on anymore, but this is a band I semi-tried, but haven't tried that hard and just never got to love pretty much anything about Bon Jovi after that initial excitement of thinking, yeah, Runaway, cool, love the whole idea, the whole package, and then it turns out that's not even the band, anyways, right?
Yeah.
Yeah. So it's like so many reasons it was kind of all over, and I just never jumped on the Bon Jovi train. There you go.
Yeah, I mean, I agree with you. I don't hate Bon Jovi. I don't find a lot to like there. I can appreciate a couple of their hits. I've got like a greatest hits CD that I bought like a million years ago. That's here. I mean, my wife kind of digs Bon Jovi, and my kids like Bon Jovi. But for me, I think after I went to see them live that first time in like the late '80s, took my then girlfriend at the time, my brother took his girlfriend, and we went, and I experienced women screaming for 2 hours straight every time John opened his mouth or Richie went up to play a guitar solo. And I was like, what is this? And you know, it's like, and I just, right after that, I was like, I just kind of lost interest totally, because, you know, the band doesn't quite rock enough for me. And it's very kind of saccharine-ish. And, you know, they've got that whole, yeah, we're from Jersey and all that kind of stuff. And I'm like, I don't know. It just, yeah. And I never really liked the sound of the albums. Like I said, they can write a catchy tune. I mean, I will give them that, because there's a lot of really accessible, you know, hook-laden songs. But yeah, for the most part, I don't really get it. I don't get
Yeah, just a couple more things. I hated the clothes all the time. The clothes looked ridiculous, right? And because they're trying to, at one point they were super hair metal, but they always tried to straddle that, oh, we're actually more upscale than that, but we're hair metal at the same time. The hair always looked ridiculous. Yeah, and you know, I know they've you know, him himself, John Bon Jovi, has done a little bit of that shift from like a John Cougar Mellencamp to a John Mellencamp. He's taken more seriously, but I completely buy into the John Mellencamp. I think the guy's a rock god. He's amazing to me. I worship the guy, right? Did not happen with John Bon Jovi the same way.
Yeah. All right, my first band of the day. So I actually owned their first like 3 or 4 LPs back in the day. I don't have anything by them anymore. I will say, in the years since I have been doing this channel, I don't think I have ever been asked more times to do a show on a band than I have for Wasp.
Right.
And it's like, and the funny thing is, you know, Wasp were fairly popular back in the day. I mean, yeah, I kind of dug them early on to an extent. But then, man, you know, for like decades, you never heard of Wasp at all. It's like Wasp just kind of like disappeared. Someone stepped on the Wasp and kind of pushed it under a rock or whatever. And it's like, okay, you know, but now all of a sudden it's, you would swear by the amount of people that asked me to do content on Wasp, that Wasp is the most popular metal band that ever existed. And the truth of the matter is that is not really the case, is it?
Yeah.
You know, I had the debut, that was pretty good. Last Command, that was okay. Inside the Electric Circus, I know a lot of people love that album. That for me started to, you know, I lost a little interest there. Headless Children, people proclaim that's like one of the greatest concept albums of all time. I mean, I'm sorry, the Crimson Idol. Again, not terrible, but you know, back then when Wasp were big, I mean, I was listening to Metallica and Megadeth and Slayer and Sabbath and Purple and Scorpions and Judas Priest and Maiden and all this kind of stuff. And I saw Wasp as somewhat of a band that tried to push a gimmick early on. You know, they had that kind of Kiss meets Alice Cooper, a little bit of Twisted Sister look to them. You know, Blackie was trying to be this scary dude, right? You had, you know, Chris Holmes and, you know, all the Chris Holmes stories later on and all that nonsense with the whole civilization thing and whatever. But I just didn't find their music that compelling. I didn't think they had great riffs on their songs. I didn't particularly care for Blackie's vocals for the most part, where they weren't terribly, sounded kind of different. I was into guitar solos at the time, right? I loved all these bands that had these virtuoso, you know, flashy guitar solos that were really memorable. I didn't find anything about Wasp music memorable in that aspect. Like musicality, musicianship didn't really grab me. And then, you know, they've had all these lineup changes, and then Blackie switches the guitar from bass, and it's like, whatever. And then the band just kind of disappeared. And they kept releasing albums. Nobody talked about them. Nobody seemed to buy them. But all of a sudden now Wasp are like this legendary band. Were they ever really legendary? To my ears, I just don't hear it. I don't you know, if you were to ask me right now, and again, I owned a bunch of their albums back in the day, to name 10 songs, I probably couldn't do it, because none of those, even those albums that I had that I listened to, that I really tried to love back in the day, they never resonated with me. I just never really got it. I don't find their music overly catchy or memorable. From a metal perspective, those albums really weren't that heavy, were they? I mean, am I just missing out here? I don't know. So that's why everybody watching who's been asking, and I've been answering for the last 2 years or more, I don't get Wasp. I don't own any Wasp anymore. I just don't see what was so great about them. Yeah. And unlike another band, which I'm not going to talk about today, actually, I'll talk about them right now, King's X. I never disliked King's X. I just, for whatever reason, you know, you just can't buy every album from every single band that you listen to. For King's X, I had a couple of their early albums. I kind of dug them, but I didn't love them, and I just didn't bother going any further. Well, now I am attempting to do that with King's X, and I'm pleasantly surprised at what I missed out on. But Wasp, I just kept trying to go back to over the years, because maybe it's just me, and I'm just like, man, I just don't get what all the uproar is about with this band. So there you have it, Wasp.
Yeah, quickly on Wasp. I mean, that's a funny one. So I totally agree, and I'll tell you, I get asked to why don't you write a book on Wasp all the time? Like you're right. I mean, they are really being elevated into the pantheon of the greats over time. I think that's happening. Part of that has to do with the mystique of Blackie and the fact that he's pretty reclusive these days. I love interviewing Blackie. Like he's the greatest guy to talk to. He's a smart guy. He has a lot of insightful things to say about his albums. I love the stuff later on, but I was not particularly on board all through the 80s. I mean, I was fairly on board, but again, I agree with you. His vocals never, you know, they're just a little hard to take after a while. And that sort of Spencer Proffer Pasha production sound that they got on those records, that noisy sort of coagulated mid-range thing that he loved to do. The other thing he loved to do, and he explained this to me, and it's totally true, is he really liked having like the Keith Moon whirling around the drum kit thing going all the time. So there's always a racket going on with the drums with that band, and that was on purpose. He loved that, right? And that's why he covered the Who and stuff later on. But yeah, so and I like the later albums more than the earlier albums. So part of it has to do with just getting to know him and interviewing Chris and going out to lunch with him and Chris and Tim this one time with the label here in Toronto. It's hilarious. But I totally agree. I think they are being slowly elevated to legendary status. And for me, like you, for you being asked to do a show on it, I'm being asked to write books on them all the time. So
yeah, there you go. And another thing too, it's like I've seen them live a few times, and I think almost every time I've seen them, they've been like on a triple bill. And every time I thought they were the worst of the three bands that I saw. Yeah. I didn't think they were a compelling live band. And, you know, growing up and, you know, seeing a lot of shows in the 80s, we sometimes look back and remember some of these bands based on those live performances. And I quite frankly never saw a Wasp show that I thought, wow, that was really good. And
there's always bad blood, right? That's the other thing with a lot of these bands. And I'm going to talk about it moving on. But with Blackie, every time he comes to Toronto, there seems to be some drama about that big mic stand that's too heavy to put in where they want to put it and all this. And he makes demands, and the show doesn't go on, or the show is late, and he's ticked off the whole night, and everybody kind of knows it. So when bad blood happens with some of these bands, and that's a little bit of my Bon Jovi thing too. There's drama in that band. They seem like prima donnas. You know, they seem like they think they're better than everybody else. So that kind of happens with some of these bands as well. But all right. So should I move on? Next one. I feel like I'm babbling.
We have a lot to say about these bands that we don't really care for much.
I guess. Yeah, I'm actually kind of surprised. I'm actually kind of surprised. So my next one is this band here, the Talking Heads. So I love the whole idea of CBGBs and all these New York bands, and I like almost every one of them. Blondie's another one I could have included on this show, but Talking Heads, as much as I've tried, as much as I've owned every album throughout the years, there's only one album of theirs I felt a super excitement for, and that was Little Creatures, because it was melodic and straightforward and rocky, and it wasn't boring and dull and quiet like the early ones, where the whole idea is we're supposed to be like nerds playing in a matchbox making this tiny music, right? And it sounded tiny, and they looked tiny, and they had tiny little haircuts and tiny little arms, right? And then later on they adopted this jungle dub funk thing. I don't know what the heck they were doing. I hated all those records. But I'm amazed, like, this is a big critics band, right?
Oh,
They're
yeah.
a big critics band, but I also went and looked on Wiki. This band made 8 albums, 7 of them certified gold and platinum. Most of them are just single gold, but they sold a lot of records. So this is a critics band that also sold a lot of records. So I loved Little Creatures. That's the double platinum one. So I felt the Talking Heads excitement at that time. I know dick all about David Byrne's solo stuff. You know, I respect the guy to death, right? But it's one of these that, you know, we haven't used the word overrated yet. You know, there's a lot of overrated that goes through a lot of these things too, right? But yeah, just one of these bands that they're just playing a kind of music that I don't like. That kind of music. I kind of dig the artistic thing and the album covers and what they're trying to do, and but almost all the kinds of music that they make, I'm just not into. There you go.
Yeah. You know, it's funny. I never owned a Talking Heads album ever in my life. And they're one of those bands that, you know, you'd hear a song on the radio or you see a video on MTV. And I would always think they're really weird. I don't know if I like that or not. You know, some of the hits are kind of catchy, but I never really, you know, but most people you talk to love that band, right? Because they had a ton of hits. And like you said, those albums sold a shitload. So I like about it, maybe like a year and a half ago, I just said, screw it. And I went and bought like a Talking Heads Greatest Hits album, which I know is never a good thing to do in my life, but I did it anyway.
Yeah.
And I'm like, all right, so these are all the songs that I remember, plus some stuff that I don't remember. And I'm like, and I was like, all right, well, I came to the conclusion I thought I would. I kind of like some of these hits, the songs I never heard before. I don't really care for, and I still think the band is really weird and really not my thing. So there you have it. So that was $15, probably wasted. I'll probably never listen to that again. But
yeah,
I mean, I can appreciate what they do, but it's just not really for me either. Yeah,
the productions aren't great. The tones aren't great. You know, they experimented with a lot of weird tones on like Fear of Music and Speaking in Tongues or whatever it's called. I mean, those two pretty funky ones, right?
Yeah.
Worked with some great collaborators, but for the most part, it almost sounds like kids' music half the time, right? Like it sounds like children's music. Yet it's apparently very, very intellectual and all this stuff, right? But give me the Ramones and the Dictators and the Dead Boys any day, right?
Yeah. So Martin brought up a term before that I was hoping not to use today, but I'm going to use it anyway. Overrated, right? So I have a couple on my list that I find completely overrated. This is one of them, and I've talked about this band before. I'm going to talk about them again because I am astonished by how many people I meet on a day-to-day basis who proclaim that this is the greatest band of the last like almost 30 years, and I just don't get it. Pearl Jam. I mean, when 10 first came out, I was on board. I still think 10 is a pretty good album. That is a great debut. That came at a time where I think the world was looking for some different stuff. I thought, you know, Eddie Vedder, really cool singer. He had that voice, right? Good hard rock anthems on that album. It had a different feel than a lot of other stuff coming out around that same time. I thought really melodic, good musicianship. And they obviously knew how to write catchy, memorable, anthemic songs, right? So, all right, I was on board. And then the second album came out, and I'm like, yeah, this is not quite as enjoyable as that one. But I was like, all right, I attempted to continue to try and get into this band. And then Vitology came out, and then for me, the well completely ran dry. And I'm like, all right, so everything that I loved about that first album, this band is not really like that anymore. And I had continued to at least give a cursory listen to a few of because they've released, I don't know what, a dozen albums, I think, since then, something like that. I continue to like give a quick listen to a lot of that stuff. And all of a sudden, this really good, unique hard rock band from Seattle, whether you want to call them grunge or alternative, whatever the hell you want to call them. All of a sudden, you mentioned John Mellencamp before. All of a sudden, Eddie Vedder and company are trying to do this. We're Americana now, right? Forget all the loud, big riffs and the angry vocals and all that kind of stuff. And we're just going to kind of settle into just a good old fashioned American band, right? Whatever that is. Elvis, Eddie Vedder, not very interesting anymore, although he seems to have, you know, controversial things to say from time to time, but then, it became more important to hobnob with the old classic rock stars like Neil Young and Pete Townsend and whatnot. And I'm thinking, well, what happened to that really energetic, really good, unique, original hard rock band from the early 90s? They're not there anymore for me. And I don't understand, people like, oh yeah, Pearl Jam released the new album last year. It was the best album of the year. And I'm like, all right, that may be true. I don't get it. Does the general public think that anymore? Or is it just these Pearl Jam fans who have followed them since the beginning that will worship anything they've ever done? I don't know. Maybe I'm missing something, but I just don't find their music compelling at all now. And quite frankly, I find it quite boring. Those first couple albums are at least pretty interesting and memorable. And this whole Pearl Jam does Americana thing, I don't understand, and I'm not interested.
Interesting. I would line up pretty much exactly with everything you said here. I don't think I'd be as harsh as to include them on this list. For me, I worshipped Versus. I quite liked Vitalogy a lot, and then I quite liked the first one a lot, but exactly the same as you. As time goes on, I checked out. They became this kind of general band doing general things like Foo Fighters, it's like, what are they, right? And it's just like, we're a general rock and roll band. They're losing the far edges of their quirkiness as they move on, I think. I love his voice. I love the idea of Eddie Vedder and the whole rest of the band, but just like you, I just slowly checked out. And again, one thing that happens with these bands, this is a good example of one that doesn't communicate with the outside world enough to keep you engaged, right? You're not reading the interviews that are getting you excited about the albums and learning about the songs. Just like I'm huge into Formula One now because of the Netflix series Drive to Survive, right? When you get to know all the personalities in a thing, that's what gets you into something. And that's the same with reading a book on a band or reading the liner notes or whatever. And Pearl Jam just seemed to become just weirdly reclusive. I'm sure if you went and dug, you could see anything you wanted to see. But yeah, I totally agree. And like I say, I think they've got a little bit of that Foo Fighters malaise that and because that's another band. I see, I would put those two together as brother sister bands, and I'd almost say no. I'm not going to inflict this list, Pearl Jam onto this list, but I would almost throw Foo Fighters onto the list, right?
Yeah, for me, I mean, I haven't heard enough Foo Fighters to even qualify. What I've heard, which is the hits they have, I haven't really liked too much, but there are people who think they're the greatest thing since sliced bread. And it's like, okay, I can't really say yes or no because they haven't interested me enough to go any further than what I've heard on, out in social media. So.
All right. So my next choice is this artist right here, and I'm showing you the books by her. Patti Smith, because I've owned most of the Patti Smith albums throughout my life, starting right at the beginning as new releases. I don't know if I ever bought a Patti Smith album brand new. I was probably buying them all used, which just goes to show they were always in the used bin, so it was always easy to buy them used. But totally love the idea of Patti Smith and this whole Just Kids, in New York story. This was a great book that she did. I even went and bought her collected lyrics, brand new, but the music across all those records, I just found a little bit like the Talking Heads. It was a little bit too mellow, conservative, based in all the conservative songwriting tropes of the early 70s and maybe even the late 60s. Patti Smith, granted, had a pretty consistent band throughout with Lenny Kaye and Ivan Krall in the beginning, J.D. Doherty on drums, Tony Shanahan. These people were kind of always around, but still the music as they went on, there was no kind of set identity to what she was doing. Not crazy about her vocals. They're okay. I don't know. I just never bought into the whole package. And I suppose I didn't even realize here, but following it up on Talking Heads, it's the exact same thing. It was just too mellow and staid and conventional from a musical point of view for me. It just seemed like it was a band that was just playing whatever to back up a poet doing a beat poet talk. And that's kind of how I've always felt about Patti Smith. Love the idea of Patti, respect the heck out of Patti. And I've read, I've read her stuff. I think there was a follow-up to Just Kids that was also a pretty big hit. I don't think I have that or have read it, but But yeah, when it comes to the records, just never really checked in a big way and loved them. Other than I think I felt the magic of Radio Ethiopia, that one way back in the beginning. What is that, second album, third album? So I liked that one at the time, but after that, no. There we go, another guest.
Wow, she hasn't appeared on camera in a while. Hello. Yeah, I never got past her voice.
Right.
And that was like the wall went up right there. But
yeah,
great lyricist, right? I mean, she did all that work with BOC and,
Interesting, the voice. We'll talk about voices in a minute. Yeah.
All right, we'll talk about voices right now.
Okay.
So this next one, let me look this one out. You're gonna go out, you're gonna stay in here. What are you gonna do? All right. So there is a band, a prog band that I have forever heard from so many people that if you really want to get into serious progressive rock, you got to listen to this band. This band is doing the most unique thing on the planet. They have been since the early 70s. It's almost like, the band that's in the dark reaches of the netherworlds of like the, underground prog rock that everybody seems to love. Everybody seems to love. It's like, Pete, how come you never talk about Magma on this?
I knew that was coming. Yeah.
So let me tell you my history with Magma. So back in like probably the late 90s, I was going to they were having all these prog rock festivals around, the US and what have you. I went to Nearfest for like 7 years in a row. And all these people telling me, you got to listen to Magma, got to listen to Magma. I'm like, all right, I've heard about this band. Never dived into their music, whatnot. So being me, because this is what I do, I said, all right, you know what I'm going to do? I'm just going to go and I'm going to buy the whole catalog right off the bat without even listening to them. Yeah. All right. So, and these are not, cheap CDs to get, right? They're all imports and whatnot. So I bought like 10, 12 of them. I don't even remember. And I started listening to this stuff and I'm like, yeah, that's really different. Yeah, I don't know if I like this, but I kept trying. So for those of you who don't know, Magma is a French band. They are one of the originators of this term called Zool, Zeuhl, which is supposedly French for vibratory music, whatever the hell that means. But basically, these guys did something really unique. They created their own language called Kobayan. So all their albums have these really sci-fi kind of, themes going on, but all sung in this totally made up language called Kobayan. And the Christian Vander, the leader of the band, he's also the drummer, phenomenal musician, by the way, I will say, would utilize male and female vocals and choral sections and chants and all this kind of stuff. The music is very rhythmically repetitive. They would kind of go on a vamp for like 5 minutes with all this like all these weird vocals, male and female, shooting all over the place. And to my ears, it's just absolute cacophony. I like their early albums. Their first couple albums are very jazzy, kind of almost like Ornette Coleman type of thing, like early 70s Miles Davis, which I can appreciate, less on all these weird vocals and, Kobayan storytelling and more in this kind of like weird avant-garde jazz realm. But then they started to get more and more into these themes. And every album to me sounded exactly the same with these same repetitive rhythms that would go on for eons on end. Not a lot of soloing. You got all these great musicians. There's not a lot of guitar. You got, noisy sax from time to time, all the different drums and percussion, all these vocalists. And I got to a point, I'm like, this does not compute, But yet there seems to be nobody else in this world who has the same opinion of this band that me. Everybody else seems to love them and can't wait for the next album to come out. And Christian Vander is a god and all this kind of stuff. I saw them live once. I left halfway through the set. I couldn't take it. And I like a lot of death metal and black metal and really noisy stuff that doesn't make a lot of sense. I listen to a lot of weird jazz. I just don't get Magma at all. And I think if they were like maybe an purely instrumental band, I could probably appreciate it on a greater level. It's just every time they start with all this weird repetitive chanting and all these, it just drives me nuts. Right. I'm talking about it and I'm getting aggravated because again, it's probably a band that I should love. I just can't get into it. Can't get into it. And I've tried. I have since gotten rid of all of those CDs that I spent all sorts of money on because I'm like, they're just taking up space and I'm never going to listen to these again. I tried. I literally tried for 20 years to constantly, periodically go through and listen to them. I'm like, I still hate this as much as I did the first time I listened to it, the second, third, fifth, 10th, and it just wasn't working for me. So again, guys, I know there's a lot of fans out there. Stop asking me about Magma. I do not like them. I cannot get into them. I've tried. I've given up. Yeah. That's it.
Well, I totally agree with you. And I'm even less invested in them. I mean, it's almost like the very worst of the things that Hawkwind does, combined with the very worst of French avant-garde, with the very worst of Italian music, cinematic prog, whatever you want to call it, Hungarian prog, Omega or whatever they're called, right? Krautrock, right?
Yeah.
You know, the most annoying things Amandul 2 has ever done, right? All like coalesced. And then when you get the made up language too, it's practically instrumental music for me at that point, right? Yeah. I've owned them on vinyl along the years, and you looked at them as a kid and whoa, what, you know, that one, remember the one H.R. Geiger
great,
kind of cover, right?
Yeah. Great. It looks fantastic. And then you put it on, you're like, ugh.
Yeah.
What the world is this?
All right. So, all right. My next choice is probably the most controversial of all these. This band right here, you might have heard of them. They're called Journey. Now, my relationship with Journey goes like this. Barely know anything of all the later stuff. I actually don't even know. I've owned everything over the years, right? Barely know the early prog fusion stuff that everybody loves. The middle stuff. Now, this is kind of interesting. So at one point, I went on this massive Journey kick. It lasted about 2 or 3 months. I bought everything. I think I told this story before. There was a local store here when vinyl was going out and CDs were coming up. He had an entire basement of $1 vinyl. And I used to go in there and buy boxes of vinyl. It was the way I caught up on lots of catalog stuff. Journey was in there like crazy. Journey and Styx and REO and Grand Funk. So every record I didn't own at that point in classic rock, I was picking up for $1, right? So got into all of that stuff in a huge way, was picking out all the songs I loved, would play them over and over again for a long time. So I did have my super hard era with Journey, but it faded. And the last thing I want to say about Journey, and this is a weird one because no one agrees with me on this. Steve Perry is a novelty voice for me. You know how a lot of people will not give Rush a try because of Geddy Lee? We had a weird thing as kids where we would not give the Ramones a try because of Joey. And later on, I don't even hear the novelty in his voice anymore. I just love the Ramones, right? He's just another guy in the Ramones. There's the singer. There he is singing. Steve Perry, for me, is not the consummate singer everybody talks about. And also, I want to split. There's a difference between here's your voice and here's how you sing, right? He is the consummate singer. He's a great singer. He's an amazing singer, and everything he does with that voice is great. I don't like that voice. I don't think it's a particularly great super high voice. It sounds comical to me, his voice. And so I always had this barrier that went up. People even say this about Max Webster, with Kim Mitchell, and I get offended. I'm shocked and I'm offended because not once in 50 years or 40 or whatever it's been since Max Webster started, did I ever think that Kim Mitchell guy is not a very good singer. Never thought it. It never crossed my mind, right? But I've had 2 or 3 or 4 pretty high thinking music fans tell me, I just can't get past the singing of Max Webster. I'm going, what? Yeah. What's wrong with it? I don't know, right? But so Journey's always been that band for me. I would listen to them and go, this is kind of a novelty band to me because that guy's weird clown voice. That weird, I don't know. It's a cross between a high voice and a falsetto and a girly voice. And it's got some vocal fry on it, yet it's also high at the same time. And the way the guys looked, even like just everything about them, but yeah, so that's the main thing. That's the main thing. Well, actually, one more last thing to say. Didn't like the Mike Stone productions. I found them noisy and annoying, like the first Asia album. Like it just sounds like there's errors to what they're doing. It's just distorted and weird and loud and echoey. Those classic productions everybody thinks are classic productions. I just find them noisy for that kind of music, which is, you want that kind of beautiful, well put together melodic stadium rock music to have high fidelity. And I don't consider those records high fidelity at all. There you go, Journey.
So just so everybody knows, so Martin shared his list with me prior to us doing this show, and he was a little nervous about it. He's like, I don't want to offend you because I know you like a lot of these bands, a couple of these bands that are on my list. I'm like, you're not offending me at all. I totally understand that, just like some of the stuff on my list, you can't love everything, right? And just because I love Journey, I mean, I totally get it. I've run into a few people in my life who don't like Journey, and it's like, and Steve Perry is not for everybody. I personally think he was a great singer. I don't think he is anymore.
Did you ever even really ever hear that Steve Perry is not for everybody? Because I don't ever hear that. I just hear him at the top of the list of the greatest singers of all time. Right.
I have a friend who hates Journey and just can't stand his voice at all. So yeah, I've heard it. Yeah. But the funny thing is, what I think is weird is there are a lot of people, and this is a subject for a totally different show, who, without Steve Perry singing, they can't accept anything that Journey does. It's like he is the only singer ever. And it's like, I love him. I think he's great. But you know what? They've had a really great singer too for the last decade and a half, right? So, and people won't accept anything without, Steve. So whatever. Yeah. But I mean, that's totally cool. It's like, you can't love everything. I dig Journey, but that's just me.
Okay.
Well, my next choice is a band that I know a lot of people love, kind of like Martin's last pick. I know people worship and love the Pretenders. I don't get the Pretenders. I like Mystery Achievement. I think is a great song. Unfortunately, I have never heard another Pretenders song that I like even remotely as much as I like that one. Again, this goes back to, I'm not a big, whatever you want to call it, post-punk new wave type of, I'm not a real fan of this style of music to begin with. But I always kind of wanted to like the Pretenders because they got that kind of like tough guy image, and Chrissy's she's like a tough chick, and she's like, out of a lot of these bands around that era, she always looked like a rocker. She had the attitude, she was with Ray Davies, that's kind of cool and all that. But at the end of the day, I never really liked her vocals much, number one. I think James Honeyman Scott is a really good guitar player, but I never heard enough on these albums that made me want to kind of dive back in a little bit more. And like I said, other than that one song, even all those other hits that they had, they don't really do anything for me. And it's one of those bands that I always wanted to go. I would, I've had plenty of friends who have been big fans, and we go hang out, they play these albums, and I'm kind of like, I'm a little bored, right? Because I want a little more, and I don't care for the voice, and just the songs just don't grab me. But again, it's that kind of like style of music that just doesn't really resonate with me, even though there's a toughness to the Pretenders and kind of like a bit of a charm too, that I always would expect would appeal to me. And it just quite doesn't. And I'm just like, I can't tell you how many times people talk to me and they're like, they just love the Pretenders and those old Pretenders albums are so great. And I kind of like don't really have anything to say because I'm like, yeah, I don't really feel that way. I want to join in on the fun, but it just doesn't do anything for me, unfortunately.
All right. Yeah. My comment would be, they're a little bit like Pearl Jam for me, where it starts to fade over time, but I worship the first album and Pretenders 2. I just love that whole interplay and the production, the interplay between the guitar, bass, and drums. I love her voice as well. I actually play those first two albums quite a bit regularly. And then it does start to go downhill because I also feel that they become just so general. They lose this odd chemistry, and those two albums are very similar to each other, and they're really kind of tight and interesting and urgently recorded and tough. They do have a really unique sound, but after that they kind of lose the uniqueness of their sound as they get bigger, and then they have the hits, and Back on the Chain Gang, and they do covers, and things spread out, people die, they got new members in the band, it kind of becomes just Chrissy, and it just feels that way. So I literally don't even know much of the later Pretenders all that well. I don't know how many albums they ever made, but I do respect them, and I would play them, and I do like them, but I love the first two albums. So
it's kind of like the Cars situation here, right? That first album, that first Cars album is phenomenal, right? It's one of the greats of all time.
Mhm.
Candio is not quite as good, but it has similar qualities. And then for me, it just kind of like falls off
Yeah. Yeah.
after that, right?
Yeah.
And yeah, again, I can appreciate the first couple Pretenders albums. I can. I just don't enjoy them, right? Other
Yeah.
than like a track or two. I've tried, and it's just like, I don't know. I'm just not hearing what everybody else is hearing.
Yeah.
But
Boy, yeah, I could have put Cars on here as well,
yeah,
right? So
yeah.
yeah, and all these, just to remind, I mean, same thing. It's like some of them have sold a ton of albums, some of them are critics favorites, some of them are hated by the critics but have sold a lot, some are in the middle, right? Pretenders is definitely a critically acclaimed
Oh yeah.
band, and they sold quite a few records. They had a pretty good run. So
Yeah.
all right, my last one is going to be the same sort of tone along the line of the Journey pick, because this is the first one that always comes to mind with me, and I have a very similar experience with this band as I do with Journey. It would be the Eagles. So again, same kind of thing. I went to that store. I bought a bunch of Eagles albums for $1. I had a massive Eagles kick for a long time. I knew all of those albums, top to bottom, left to right. There aren't that many. It was easy to master them all. And I was kind of on board. But my feeling with the Eagles is I don't really dig this whole country rock thing very much. JD Souther, forget it. Linda Ronstadt, forget it. Your Flying Burrito Brothers, Graham Parsons. There's your massive critic fave, like a classic artist. If you want to go further down folk, John Prine is apparently the greatest songwriter who ever lived. I know nothing about John Prine. So that whole Avocado Mafia troubadour set from over there, not on board, except I worship Little Feat. I love them to death. They're geniuses. Love everything they've ever done. I love the new stuff even more than the old stuff in a lot of cases. The last 5 albums over the first 5 in some ways. But Eagles, the funny thing about Eagles is I've read a book or two on them. I hate that they're kind of, they were always fighting. They always seem greedy. They always seem kind of misogynistic or rock star or prima donna-y or groupie-ish or cocaine-ish. So after a while, like all the bad vibes, when they're making this music that's supposed to be soft and about relationships and it's supposed to be kind of about your emotions and all this, to find out they're kind of like douchey guys, that kind of bothers me over time about bands. And as you keep reading, and then I was semi on board. I had the little sort of magic Don Henley moment there when he was super big, and I went and saw him live, and so I was kind of on board. But now I look back to that 90s moment in retrospect, and I thought this is like as white and as Karenish as it gets in the world. Don Henley in the 90s, right? And he seemed always so self-important, and he seemed like a prima donna. Hate the drumming. The drumming's horrible across all the Eagles albums. Hate the production. It's the most cardboardy, humorless production across all those albums. The Glenn Frey solo albums are some of the hated. That's one of the hated solo catalogs in all of mankind, right? So I don't know. It's obviously you can't hate this album, and my second favorite would be Long Run, because it's a little rocky. Love the Joe Walsh contribution to the band. Don't like really any of the singers all that much. Don't like their voices. So there you go. Lot of reasons to not like them, but like I say, I mean, I had an era there where I knew those records all up and down, left and right, but then it's like, okay, you got to draw the line somewhere. You don't really like this kind of music. It's too simple. It's too basic. The recordings aren't good. The drumming is stiff. Don't like the voices. There you go. Eagles.
Yeah. I mean, I grew up with the Eagles, so I've always had a soft spot for them. But I will tell you, I don't really listen to them all that much anymore. I mean, occasionally. I mean, my wife is a fan, so it's like, we do hear them here at the house. But yeah, I mean, they'll never come up in a list of my favorite bands of all time. I'll put it to you that way. But I do appreciate them. I've always liked them, and I just have a ton of history with them. But I agree with a lot of your points. I can't really argue any of that. It's like the Eagles to me are like an American institution. They've always been there, and it's almost like most people like them or love them by default, right? And I could be a little guilty of that as well. So, but yeah, not a lot of albums. I mean,
I forgot the ticket thing too, right? The super high ticket price thing.
Oh yeah,
that they brought in, right? So all of these things make you don't like a band after a while, right?
Well, they've become very corporate, right? I mean, over the years.
Oh yeah, corporate is
like
one of the most corporate bands there is.
Yeah,
Eagles and Fleetwood Mac, pretty much, right?
Greedy Eagles, you know. It's just like, I don't know. All right, well, I saved what everybody's probably expecting from me for last. And again, apologies to the millions and millions of people who love this band and worship this band, and I just never have, and I don't really give them much slack, unfortunately. But that's Guns N' Roses. You know, hey, I'm going to give them complete props for that debut album. It's one of the greatest debuts of all time, according to most people. I appreciate it for what it is, right? I was into it when it first came out. But it was just like kind of like that Nirvana Nevermore album or Nevermind album when it first came out. It's like when it first hit, I was like, oh, this is pretty cool. This is kind of different. I kind of like this. And then I just kind of like really lost interest very, very quickly. I don't know, just to me, so many people scream like Guns N' Roses. They were so original. They were right place at the right time. But I mean, to me, they just were kind of like taking what Aerosmith was doing and the Stones were doing and kind of updating it for the late 80s, right? With lots of piss and vinegar, and they had the attitude, and they were, I mean, let's face it, Guns N' Roses were rock stars. We don't see those type of people anymore, right? They were out there, they got all the chicks, they were doing all the drugs, doing all the crazy stuff, showing up, you know, loaded at the award ceremonies and, you know, all the crazy stuff that happened on tour. I mean, they lived the lives, they were rock stars, and I get all that. But I think sometimes they to me, they seem like they took all that way too seriously, and they wanted to be like the greatest of all time. But yet we didn't really get, you know, where were all the great albums after that? For me, the Use Your Illusion albums that came out, I mean, if you take like the best stuff of both of those albums, you have a pretty decent album. I think for me anyway, those are really overblown. There's a lot of filler on those, and that was still riding the success of the debut. All right. Then they do a couple of EPs and, you know, lots of covers. I saw them live once. I thought they were awful, right? I had an ex who was completely in love with Guns N' Roses, and all she would do was talk about Axl and Slash and Axl and Slash and play them all the time. And I was like, God, I can't do it anymore with these guys. And then, you know, they disappear for eons. Axl's putting together some weird abomination band of Guns N' Roses that changes every week, all canceled tours, no albums, right? And just becomes like this, just like weird dude with a big ego. I've always appreciated Slash. I think Slash is a very fine guitar player. I've liked almost everything he's done on his own. And I, you know, for me, that's the one reason that I kind of even give Guns N' Roses any thought whatsoever, because I appreciate him as a musician and I really like what he's done. But I don't know. And at the end of the day, I don't like Axl's voice. Brian Johnson and Dan McCafferty from Nazareth did that style of vocals way better a long time before. And I don't know. I just, their music, even that classic first album, I never need to hear it again. It's like, you know, the handful of hits are completely played out for me. Some of the deep tracks are pretty decent, but I just never have a need to hear any Guns N' Roses music whatsoever. And then quite frankly, I think when we look back at that time, at the other like kind of bands like similar, that kind of like bluesy, you know, raunchy rock and roll, I'd rather listen to Tesla or Badlands any day. And I find that Guns N' Roses music to me just isn't interesting. And I really don't get the worship for them as like one of the greatest bands of all time. I don't know. I don't see it. I don't hear it. Seeing them live, I didn't experience it, but I've talked to plenty of people who have seen them on the more recent tours and said one of the best concerts they've ever seen. I don't know. And I'm just not getting it, I guess. Maybe it's just me. Who knows?
Yeah, it's interesting. If this show was about albums, I probably would have put Appetite in there, because to me, like, I quite like Guns N' Roses a lot, but again, back to that term overrated, because that debut is rated so amazingly highly and it sold so many copies. I think you have to call it overrated, because I just remember growing up with it and just being there for all this drama. And that, again, here we go with the drama. You start not liking the guys over time with all the where's the next album thing and all that, right? And all the, you know, the riots and the coming on late and all that. I mean, all that wears on you in terms of liking a band. But to me, I think the debut is an 8. I think that both Use Your Illusions are 8s. I like them as much as the debut. And I was on board, and it was an exciting time and all that. And, you know, I got a free, how did that work? So one record store in Toronto would give you, if you bought either of them, you would get a free t-shirt. And the other record store, the big, huge, massive competing store across the street, if you bought one of them, they gave you the second one free. So there was a lot of you know, hoopla around those things coming out. But so yeah, I always thought, I totally agree. I like Tesla albums more than the first Guns album. I like Badlands albums more than the first Guns album. To me, it's an 8. You know, it's a solid 8, as you know, and the other ones maybe a little lower than 8, but I wouldn't even say as low as 7.5. And then I never gave Chinese Democracy much of a you know, look in. And I agree, I don't like Axl's voice particularly much either. So yeah, for all those reasons, you know, I don't think I'd go so far as to put them on this list, but yeah, that first album to me is it's not a 10, it's an 8.
Yeah, and you know, again, a lot of people love them, and I totally get it. The purpose of the show is that, you know, we've tried, it just doesn't work for us. So it's like, what are you gonna do? Got a couple honorable mentions?
Yeah, so here I almost feel like I'm just going to rattle off these band names and probably be in for a lot of abuse, but I just feel like there's a whole pile that I want to put below that line because we tolerate way too much, right? When we're huge music fans, we love way too much, and it probably gets even boring for people saying how, like I say, how we love this and we love that, we love that. So here's a bunch of band names that I really just have tried. It's some, you know, repeatedly over time. And I'm just going to rattle all these off because I thought, man, I have a pretty big list here. Radiohead, Tool, even Enslaved, legendary band, right?
Wow, I love it.
I have a bunch of Enslaved. It's so some of these are what, you know, when I talk about retirement bands that I go, man, with Enslaved, I just need to take a month and just spend some time.
Yeah, I mean, those are long albums. There's a lot of them. Yeah.
Yeah, and you could probably, there's bands like Primordial, for example. When I did give them a look in, I loved it, and I thought, man, I could listen to nothing but Primordial for 6 months. Yeah. And I feel Enslaved is one of those kinds of bands. But it's funny with Tool, just never broke through that barrier of being there and soaking the ball in. Gojira, Wilco, Fish, Dave Matthews Band, Grand Funk is always one that comes up. Prince, never got Prince. The Band, Bob Dylan, Bruce Springsteen to some extent, Bob Seger definitely. Free Humble Pie Faces.
Wow.
They're there. They do what they do. I own everything. I've never had one become, oh my God, I just worship this album. Yeah, I don't think they have an album I played more than 15, 20 times ever, right? Big Star, Jefferson Anything. Nick Cave, it's a funny one, right? Massive critical rave. I try so often, I just can't get into Nick Cave in a big way. And Depeche Mode and New Order. There you go. So there's a lot, you know, a lot of those are super critically acclaimed bands that just like one day I got to keep trying, right?
I keep trying with you with Grand Funk, but I don't know. I'm losing steam on that one. So I love Grand Funk. I love Humble Pie, Free, love all that stuff. The Faces, love all that stuff. All right, so I'm with you on the Band. I had them on. You know, I don't get it. To me, the Band are completely boring. I like a couple of hits enough, but man, I just don't get that. Bob Dylan, forget about it. I can't get past that voice. I don't care, everybody, how great of a lyricist he is. I don't care if I can't listen to his voice for more than 5 seconds. That's it. Done, Mr. Dylan. Sorry. And Martin, I know you're not going to like this, but I'm sorry. I gave it a try. I don't like this at all.
Right. Yeah.
I mean, I had many conversations with you. Mike Portnoy told me, you got to listen to it. It's one of the greatest albums of all time. And I bought it. I said, all right, I got to figure out what I'm missing here. To me, this is not even a punk album. I mean, most of the album is like this weird kind of ska, reggae, pop thing. I don't know. It's like, I love London Calling. I love it. I think it's a great song. I wish the rest of the album was like that. I don't know. I've tried. I've been listening to this in the car for like weeks on end, and I'm just like, oh, it's just not.
I thought a lot of these bands, but not all of them, and maybe not even half of them, there's an element of you had to be there at the time.
That could be. Yeah, that could be. I don't know. That could be. I don't know. I just, I find, I don't know, like Jimmy Jazz and Coca-Cola, Spanish, but I don't know. Just the songs to me are like, they're silly, and I'm like, I want the like the balls and the seriousness of London Calling. And I find, don't get me wrong, I'm sure to a lot of people this album is a lot of fun, right? Because there's like this lighthearted element about this album, but I just don't find it enjoyable. I've really tried. Thankfully, I only paid $6 for it, but I don't know. But yeah, but I'm the only one, it seems, because everybody I talk to says this is a classic album. It's a legendary album, and I'm like, all right, I got to figure it out. It's just not happening. It's just not happening, guys. I don't know. I'm sorry. What can I tell you?
Okay.
I tried. Anyway, there you have it, everybody. Some stuff that we just can't get into. Again, the comments are probably going to be raging as we speak about how beloved all of these bands are to so many people, and we get it. Trust me, we get it.
You know who we both left off that we talk about sometimes and complain about? Tom Petty.
I thought about it. You know what it is with Tom Petty? It's like I enjoy a lot of his hits, but it's not something that I reach for often. Like, there are so many people that like Tom Petty, you know, it's like Bruce Springsteen too. They're, you know, those great kind of like singer-songwriter guys that everybody loves. And I don't dislike Tom Petty's music, but like, people can't understand. It's like, well, Pete, if you like the hits, why don't you just go and check out all the albums? I don't feel compelled to go buy all those Tom Petty albums. I think the stuff that I kind of like, I dig, but it's not like I listen to Tom Petty more than like once or twice a year, if that. So it's like, you know, it's good. It's memorable, and I'm amazed at how many hits he actually had, but I don't feel compelled to go and investigate the albums any further. I don't know. It's just me.
Yeah.
And you mentioned Springsteen before too. That's a, you know, he's kind of draw the line type of thing with a lot of people. I personally, I like a lot of the classic E Street Band albums. I find some of his albums that he did on his own without the E Street Band not quite as interesting. But
yeah, I wouldn't include him here. To me, he'd be like that kind of retirement guy that I think, you know, I really want to play these albums a lot. Yeah, I love the guy to death, right? But yeah, just anything that strikes me as pub rock, that barroom rock and roll, or R&B rock and roll, Southside Johnny, anything that goes down that road, I start turning off, right?
Yeah, I almost put Status Quo on this list, believe it or not.
Wow.
But you know, because for me, I like them enough. And I have a whole bunch of their albums. I rarely listen to them, but I do on occasion like them. But like you mentioned this before, I'm not a huge fan of like boogie stuff. I have to really be in the mood for it. So for me, Status Quo is like, I really have to be in the mood for that. Otherwise, that shit bores me like really quickly. But I appreciate what they do. I do like a lot of their albums. I own them, right? But I have to really be in a certain place to say, okay, time to put on some Status Quo stuff, because to me that's just, it's really, really basic, you know, barroom boogie type of thing, and that's got a place, and I don't go to that place too often, but I do like them. I like it, you know, we've talked about them enough on the channel here, and I dig a bunch of their albums. I think they're really good for what they are, but there are people who think that band is like the greatest band that ever walked the earth, and I wouldn't go that far, for me anyway. So there you have it, everybody. Martin, that you talk a little bit about that Uriah Heep book. It's coming in soon, right?
Yeah, eventually it's making its way over from the UK. So that's one of those big coffee table books. And yeah, once they land here, I always tell people this. I really don't like to even put anything at the site or tell anything about these things until I can see them with my own eyes in my office. So, but martinpopoff.com for anything that is still available.
And if you haven't gotten Martin's third Rush book, you still have that in stock?
Yeah, absolutely. That's not going out of stock. I can always get more.
Okay, sounds good. So coming up here on the channel tonight, we've got a slew of things happening tonight. We've got the Monsters Den, our regular Thursday night show. We've got Bryce from Bryce Talks Metal coming on the show tonight. So he and I are going to count down our 10 favorite thrash metal debut albums. In addition, we've also got a really fun show. We've got Rich Catino, Jack Toledano, and Chris Allo and myself. We're each going to be putting together, for those of you who grew up in the 80s, you know exactly what we're talking about here. We're going to put together a 60-minute hard rock and metal mixtape. Each one of us have assembled 30 minutes per side mixtape that we would give to someone, because this is what we did back then, who never listened to hard rock or metal. It's like, oh, I'll make you a tape. This is the stuff you should be listening to. These are the songs you should be listening to. So each one of us have meticulously put together a 60-minute mixtape, and we're going to go through the song list for you. And that's happening tonight as well. And then Martin and I, I'm sure we'll be back together next week. So stay tuned for that. We got the Hudson Valley Squares on Monday and the Prog Seat on Tuesday. Ranking the albums of Bruce Dickinson and Grim Reaper this weekend, as well as Immolation. And what else am I missing? I know there's something else. And Pat Metheny, all coming up this weekend. I'm going to be busy this weekend. So for Martin Popoff, I am Pete Pardo. Visit us on the web at www.seatranquility.org. We're on Facebook, we're on Twitter. Of course, we're here on YouTube all the damn time. See you all later. Have a good one. And we'll talk soon. Bye-bye.